Good morning to everyone, and thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the reminding me of my long list of former sins before eventually having found time to work on more sustainable policies and what it requires. I think you will get from me a presentation that will differ from Victor's. I am the government junkie in this panel. I approach sustainability from a slightly different angle. We need policies as societies. I think we have a duty to formulate policies that would create a more sustainable society. For that, we need science. Those policies need to be science-based, but I am a fairly strong believer, not apologetic at all about it, of the right of societies to set frameworks of what policies they want, what innovation they want. I do agree that innovation is an important part of a sustainable society. Without innovation, I think our societies will not be sustainable in the wide sense of what sustainability today means. I do have a bit of a problem with constantly trying to rephrase and come up with new words, because the first words are not liked by our policymakers. Sustainability, for a lot of our governing authorities, is a difficult term. They don't really like it because it implies in many ways preventive policy setting. And preventive policy setting for politicians is not very promising. I've had in my mind a discussion with an environment minister of a member state, I will not tell you which one it was, who was telling me if I do everything that we know I should be doing to prevent the problems of the next flood that is going to come up, I would be fundamentally unpopular. I would have to raise taxes to pay for protective measures. I may have to relocate a number of people from areas where they have built, but where we now know that they will be under the next flood, that we should never have built here. So relocating people is utterly unpopular. It would be the right thing to do to become more sustainable, to prevent the damage, the crisis to happen. But for a politician, it's not very promising. It's a lot more promising to have the flood come and for him to then put on his rubber boots and shake hands and show compassion. That makes a politician popular. So this may be cynical, but I think it is important that we understand that making sustainable policies is an utterly political process. In our societies, in our democratic societies, we need to work with those. And in the report I have presented in July last year, therefore, spent some time on the governance issue. I think we do need governance. We need a governance that is beginning to be more preventive. And the term resilience, to me, is a bit of a problem here, because it could very easily become a nice excuse for politicians to say, since we have made our system more resilient after the crisis, it will come back, it will absorb the crisis better. My policy setting is not so important any longer, as it would be if the crisis hits us completely unprepared. So my role as a politician is not to prevent a crisis from happening, but is just to make sure that after the crisis, the system comes back into normal functioning more easily. It's not what Victor was trying to explain as resilience, but this is very often in the debate the way in which resilience is picked up, and is picked up mainly by politicians and those that are trying to argue in favor of this. So I think what I would favor is to say resilience for the inevitable crisis makes sense. When I'm talking about earthquakes, when I'm talking about volcano eruptions, that our societies are prepared to coping with those inevitable crises is okay. And since we can't really predict them, we have to have resilience measures in place. But when we have a crisis that is man-made, man-influenced, then I think clever governance should be to change the rules to prevent the next one from happening. In my report, I talk about the unsustainability of our financial system. We have roughly 4 times financial assets compared to global GDP on our planet, and that by any definition would be called a bubble. Finance completely detached from any real values. So we know that it's going to hit us. There is the next economic crisis in the making. A lot of researchers are working on very, very clever algorithms to try to find out when this is going to happen. But no one seems to be disputing that it will happen. And I think a sustainable policy framework should be focusing on addressing the causes of these bubbles developing. And that means that we have to move into preventive governance. And we need to do this in holistic ways, because sometimes we have tried to do prevention, but we're doing it from silo approaches. In Europe, we relatively early identified climate change as a problem. So we were looking for more efficient engines, and diesel came up. And so we all went into changing our fleet to make it diesel fleets, not being aware that while perhaps doing something for the climate and the atmosphere and all the CO2 and whatever greenhouse gases we were depositing up there, we forgot that diesel produces a problem in the ambient air down here, where you and I are going out into the street and breathing air that is making us sick. So the second element for me for sustainability is go holistic. We have to understand that we have to look over our respective silos, and we have to address the waterfront of issues that we want to cover with sustainability, and that means economic, social, and ecological implications, aspects of any decision that we take. We have to move in that direction. For that to happen, I'm fundamentally convinced that we need to work on measuring. Policies that you cannot measure, and that you cannot measure appropriately and in a timely fashion, are not going to be working out well. And for the moment, we're still far away from having the appropriate indicators. We still work with GDP, despite the fact that we all know for the last 50 years the limitations of GDP. If we don't find a way to effectively include natural capital, the ecosystem contribution to our societies into these calculations, into these numbers, then we shouldn't be surprised that policy making continues to go in the wrong direction, because we need a compass that is accurate, and we don't have that compass. We don't have it for ecological reasons, we don't have it for social reasons. We still are trying to work mainly in the European Union for the impact of the social element of sustainability. We're working on GDP per capita as the main indicator. Well, that's precisely hiding what is happening in our societies. GDP per capita is an average. The problem is that people do not get average incomes. Our income distribution is exploding. We are getting more and more unequal. And if we continue to talk to our people with average measurement in trying to tell them, why are you complaining? TTIP will increase the GDP per capita will increase. You're going to be richer if we do TTIP. Why are you against TTIP? Because our reasoning is wrong. Because we're using the wrong measurement, and people are beginning to understand that I'm not getting GDP per capita in my pocket. So you politicians stop talking to me as if I made a mistake. You're using the wrong measurement. You're using the wrong indicators. So we need to make sure that we have right indicators and that we have them in timely fashion. We tend to have indicators for the moment with 2, 3, sometimes 4, 5 years different time lag. That's far too long for any proper governance. So we need to make available the measurements of our policy decisions much earlier so that we can do proper impact assessments of policies. Are the policies that we're coming up with, are they going to influence the trend in a positive or in a negative way? To be able to talk really about it, not in poetry, in descriptive language, but in hard facts, I think we need to do this, and we need to do it very urgently. And then I think we also need to understand that sustainable policy making is a fundamental democratic process where we need, obviously, to have transparent policy making. We need participation of science, of NGOs, of businesses. We need all this. But the decision making at the end in our democratic system is going to be done by elected people. So if we want to influence policies in a more sustainable direction, there is no alternative but to go to elections and to participate in elections and go the party route and make sure that we're not having this conference here among those who are interested in sustainability, but that we carry the message out into our societies and that we build the majorities in our societies that we need to have policies that are going to take us forward in more sustainable manners. My report was just trying to highlight those very basic ideas and highlight them on the example of a couple of hotspots that I have identified. I'm relatively pleased to have seen that in the State of the Union address that Juncker gave to the Parliament, he attached a letter of intent where he described the priorities for next year. And in that list of priorities, there's 6 priorities in there. They're no longer simply the 10 priorities that he has set for the entire time of his term. He has 2 that very directly are relevant to more sustainable policy making. One is that he says, I will move forward on circular economy. And I think that's a very important statement, and I hope that it will be followed up and that we will collectively take the decisions to move more into circular economy practices. And the second is that he has said he will give high priority to reviewing the common agricultural policy. And I think that also is an absolute must, because in agriculture we see a lot of what is unsustainable in Europe, and unsustainable both from a social, from an ecological, and from an economic perspective. In all 3 aspects, what we have done for the moment no longer is sustainable. So President Juncker, having very clearly said to the Parliament in writing that revisiting this in the light of sustainability, I think is a major achievement, and I hope that we can hold him to it. We can collectively make sure that the European level is coming up with a review, and that the necessary adjustments eventually can be decided and can be implemented. Sustainability for me is something that we need to continue to have on the agenda. Don't replace it by new terms, resilience, or whichever the next fashion word is. I'm afraid this is not Madonna. This is a lot more serious, and I think we need to make sure that our policy expectations for more sustainable Europe are implemented, are taken into legislation, are enforced, are monitored, and obviously are adjusted as we go along and as we find out more and better solutions. But I think it's going to be hard labor and not simply finding new terms. The new terms may seem easy, but I think it's hard labor and political organization and structure that eventually will move us to a more sustainable future. Thank you very much.